Last month in Norway, a 16-year-old girl touched an ancient stone and vanished. Security footage shows her hand glowing blue before cameras cut to static for 17 seconds. When the feed returned, she was gone. Here's what should terrify you. That stone carries a prophecy claiming Europe's most legendary bloodline never actually died. The Merovingians, the long-haired kings, who ruled France for 300 years, were supposedly erased by Charlemagne in 751 CE. The history books are wrong. They didn't disappear. They fled north into Scandinavia, carrying a secret that could shatter everything we believe about hidden power. That prophecy has been silent for 1,300 years. Now it's speaking directly to you. Tonight, you'll witness the evidence they survived in the shadows of Scandinavia. You'll meet the secret guardians who've protected their bloodline for centuries. You'll see the chilling signs their return has already begun. And you'll discover why their ancient prophecy names you as part of their final chapter. First, the stone that broke 13 centuries of silence, and the girl who walked into legend. Then the Knights Templar who never stopped guarding their secret. Finally, the prophecy itself, and why it's reaching completion right now. By the end of this investigation, you'll understand how a dynasty erased from history might still be shaping it. And you'll know why their bloodline may be walking among us today. This is the story of the dynasty that refuses to die. What you're about to see will change everything you thought you knew about European history. A forestry worker's discovery that sent shockwaves through universities across Scandinavia. Security footage of impossible events that Norwegian police closed in just 8 days. Ancient genealogies hidden by Templars that list bloodline locations across the Nordic countries. A pattern of disappearances every 3 generations that coincides with unexplained earthquakes. The full prophecy translation that mentions your role in their return. And evidence that the final signs are already happening around you. Stay with me, because what we uncover tonight might be the most important mystery you'll ever witness. April 15th, 2023. Forestry worker Lena Johansson was clearing dead pine trees near the Swedish-Norwegian border when her boot struck something hard beneath the moss. What she uncovered changed everything. A granite slab, dark as winter night, jutted from the earth at an impossible angle. Carved into its face was a symbol that sent chills down her spine. A cross with flared ends, blooming outward like petals of fire. But this wasn't just any cross. This was a Merovingian cross. The locals already had a name for this place, the Stone of the Whispering King. For generations, they'd avoided it. Fishermen said the wind carried voices, muttering in dead tongues. Hunters swore their dogs refused to approach, whimpering and pulling back on leashes. And the oldest families whispered something stranger. On nights when the aurora painted the sky green, the stone pulsed like a heartbeat. Lena thought it was just local superstition. She was wrong. When Lena cleared away centuries of moss and soil, more details emerged. Beneath the flared cross, faint grooves ran in looping spirals. They weren't Norse runes. They weren't Christian letters. They were something else entirely. A hybrid script no one recognized. And clinging to the carved lines, preserved in the frost, were traces of red pigment that had somehow survived 7 centuries of Arctic storms. Thinking it was just a local curiosity, Lena posted photos to a history forum. By morning, the thread had exploded. Linguists from Uppsala University, occultists from Denmark, anonymous scholars arguing in a frenzy of translation attempts. The photos spread like wildfire across academic networks. Then came the lab results from Trondheim that changed everything. The red pigment wasn't from any mineral found in Scandinavia. It was cinnabar, mercury sulfide, a substance mined and used exclusively in medieval France. French pigment on a Norwegian stone, 700 years old. In the carved spirals, researchers identified shapes that made their blood run cold. The bee, ancient emblem of resurrection, and a stylized sea creature, the quinator, the mythical half-man, half-beast, said to have fathered the Merovingian dynasty. The damaged script contained fragments of Latin. One phrase emerged again and again. Cum reges, septentriones exburgiscantur, sanguis prelixus. Ressurgit, when the kings of the north awaken, the blood of the long hair shall rise. But it was the name carved deeper than all the rest that proved this wasn't just ancient graffiti. Sigurlami. To Norse saga readers, Sigurlami was a shadowy king who wielded a cursed sword and vanished without explanation. But buried in dusty Frankish chronicles, Sigurlami is also recorded as a Merovingian prince. Mentioned once, then never again. The same name on a stone that shouldn't exist, in a place no Frankish prince should have ever reached. This wasn't coincidence. This was a breadcrumb left by a dynasty that was supposed to be extinct. Here's where it gets disturbing. The Jamtland stone isn't alone. Across Scandinavia, in forgotten stave churches, in chapels hidden in fjords, in ruins covered by centuries of lichen, echoes of the same prophecy keep appearing. Each one points to the same chilling possibility. The dynasty that was erased from history in 751 CE never actually died. They went underground, they fled north, and they left behind a prophecy of their return. But here's what should terrify you most. The prophecy doesn't speak in past tense. It speaks of awakening, of blood returning, of kings who rise not from graves, but from silence. And that awakening may have already begun, because 8 months after Lena's discovery, something happened at that stone that Norwegian authorities are desperately trying to cover up. A 16-year-old girl touched the granite slab and vanished. Security footage shows her hand glowing with blue light before cameras cut to static for 17 seconds. When the feed returned, she was gone, and the stone was cracked, as if struck by lightning. The girl's name, Amelie Mercier, and that surname appears in records dating back to the Knights Templar. The stone of the Whispering King has broken 13 centuries of silence. But it's raised questions that chill historians to the bone. How did French pigment end up on a Norwegian stone? Why does a Merovingian prince's name appear in Norse territory? What happened to Amelie Mercier? And why are Norwegian police refusing to investigate her disappearance? The answers lie buried in the shadows of medieval Europe, in the secret history of a dynasty that refused to die. Because the Merovingians didn't just rule France. They carried something far more dangerous than any crown. A bloodline that certain people would kill to protect, and others would die to destroy. Here's what the history books don't want you to know about the Merovingians. Their origin story wasn't just unusual, it was terrifying to medieval Christianity. A Frankish woman walks into the sea. Beneath the waves, something rises to meet her. Some chronicles describe it as silver-skinned with obsidian eyes. Others call it the quinator, half man, half beast. From that union, a child was born. His name was Merovic, and he would father a dynasty that claimed divine blood. This wasn't just royal propaganda. The Merovingians possessed something that made the Roman Church desperate to destroy them. The 5th century was chaos. Rome was collapsing. Tribes were warring. Christianity was spreading, but hadn't yet seized total control. In that vacuum, Merovic's descendants rose to power. But here's what made them different from every other medieval dynasty. They didn't need the church's approval to rule. Their authority came from something older, something no pope could grant or revoke. Their sacred hair, the Merovingians, were known as the long-haired kings. Their flowing locks weren't vanity, they were the source of their power. To cut a Merovingian's hair was to strip him of divine authority, to make him spiritually empty. Enemies knew this. When they wanted to destroy a Merovingian king, they didn't execute him. They shaved his head and sent him to a monastery, powerless and broken. But here's what should chill you. The church adopted this same practice. They knew exactly what they were doing when they retired the last Merovingian king. Royal Merovingian births were watched for 3 specific signs that proved divine blood still flowed in their veins. A red cross-shaped birthmark over the heart, a spiral hair whorl that twisted counterclockwise, and strangest of all, a faint buzzing sound only they could hear, like distant bees. Children born with all 3 signs weren't celebrated in the royal court. They were quietly sent away, north, always north. Court records speak vaguely of fostering arrangements with northern allies. But these weren't political marriages or diplomatic exchanges. This was preparation for something the church would later try to destroy. From 481 to 751 CE, the Merovingians controlled the heart of Europe. Their realm stretched across modern France, Belgium, and parts of Germany. They forged the kingdom that would become the foundation of medieval Europe. Clovis I united the fractious Frankish tribes. He converted to Christianity around 496 CE, officially aligning with Rome while secretly maintaining older traditions. But even after their conversion, something about the Merovingians made the church uneasy. They built Christian chapels right next to pagan sacred pools. They wore crosses alongside ancient symbols of the bee and the quinator. They claimed authority that didn't flow through papal blessing. They were Christians who refused to be controlled by Christianity, and that's exactly why the church had to destroy them. 751 CE. The last Merovingian king, Childeric III, was deposed. His sacred hair was cut. His crown was given to Pepin the Short with full papal blessing. Official history calls this a peaceful transition. The Merovingians were do-nothing kings who deserved to be replaced. But here's what the chronicles don't mention: the systematic destruction of Merovingian records that followed. The burning of genealogies, the disappearance of royal children who carried the sacred bloodline. This wasn't political succession. This was theological warfare. Because if the Merovingians truly carried divine blood, blood marked by ancient signs, blood tied to prophecy, then they were living threats to Rome's monopoly on divine authority. Here's where it gets disturbing. While the dynasty was officially erased, Merovingian symbols didn't disappear. They went underground. Golden bees buried with their dead kings would resurface centuries later as Napoleon's imperial emblem. Crosses with flared arms, identical to the one carved on that Norwegian stone, appear in Templar churches across Europe. Even stranger, Norse sagas contain references to southern kings with uncut hair. Voices that carried prophecy and children spirited away to northern shores. The church thought they'd destroyed the Merovingians. But symbols don't lie, and neither do the Knights Templar records we're about to examine. Because what we've discovered about their secret mission will prove that Merovingian bloodline didn't just survive. It was actively protected by the most powerful military order in medieval Europe. The question isn't whether they survived. The question is, who's been guarding them for the last 700 years? October 13th, 1307. Paris sleeps under a thin veil of mist. At dawn, the silence shatters, not with church bells, but with the pounding of armored boots on cobblestone. Across the city, doors explode open. Men in white mantles are dragged into the streets, their red crosses catching the first light of day. Some are thrown into wagons, others are shackled and marched through mud, while terrified crowds watch in silence. These are the Knights Templar. Once untouchable, answerable to no crown, feared by kings across Europe. By noon, hundreds are arrested. Within weeks, their entire order will be accused of heresy, blasphemy, and witchcraft. Within years, many will burn at the stake. But here's what the history books don't tell you. This wasn't just about money. The Templars were guarding something far more dangerous than gold. Something that could destroy the Church's authority forever. For nearly 200 years, the Knights Templar controlled the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. Officially, they were there to protect Christian pilgrims, but according to persistent whispers, they were digging beneath the ancient stones, in chambers that hadn't seen light since Solomon's time. They unearthed something that changed everything. Not just chalices or weapons, but documents, genealogies, proof of a bloodline that traced directly back through Roman Gaul to the Merovingian dynasty. If true, this meant the Church's greatest threat wasn't an empire or a heresy. It was a family, a living line of kings whose authority didn't come from papal blessing, but from divine blood. And if the Templars had proof of this, scrolls, relics, even living descendants, their destruction suddenly makes perfect sense. Here's where it gets disturbing. On the same night their brothers were rounded up in Paris, an entire Templar fleet slipped away from the port of La Rochelle. Chroniclers describe 18 ships vanishing into fog, never seen again. Official histories assume they fled south to Portugal or west to Scotland. But there are stranger accounts that historians refuse to discuss. A Hanseatic sailor in Bergen recorded ships with crimson sails docking briefly in Norway before disappearing into the fjords. A 15th century Icelandic manuscript refers cryptically to men in white mantles who brought the sleeping crown to the edge of the world, where the stars rise with fire. The sleeping crown, not a literal crown, but a bloodline, a dynasty that had been forced into hibernation. What if the Templars didn't just escape with treasure? What if they carried living descendants of the Merovingian kings north into lands beyond Rome's reach? The granite slab from Jämtland takes on new significance. Geological analysis was done by the Norwegian Institute of Technology. They confirmed the red pigment is cinnabar. Cinnabar is mercury sulfide. It was mined exclusively in medieval France. The carved name Sigralami appears in Norse sagas. It also appears in Frankish chronicles. The Frankish references describe him as a Merovingian prince. He vanished from court records in the 8th century. Dr. Rune Halvorsen studied the stone's inscriptions. He noted the Latin phrase Cum regis septentriones ex burgiscuntur. This phrase uses 14th century monastic Latin constructions. It does not use 8th century Frankish constructions. This suggests the stone wasn't carved in 751 CE. It was carved by someone centuries later. That person knew Merovingian history. Archaeological evidence has emerged across Europe. This evidence is of bloodline preservation efforts. In Portugal, Templar successor organizations maintained genealogical records. These records were of noble families. Those families were displaced during political upheaval. In Scotland, excavations happened at Roslin Chapel. They revealed hidden chambers. The chambers contained documents. These documents reference northern sanctuaries. They also reference preserved bloodlines. Dr. Robert Bridden led the Roslin excavations. He stated the evidence suggests a coordinated effort. This effort was by Templar successor groups. Their goal was to preserve specific royal genealogies, This was done across multiple countries. A joint research project began in 2019. It was between the University of Oslo and the Sorbonne. They used DNA analysis. They are tracing medieval population movements into Scandinavia. Preliminary results show specific genetic markers. These markers are consistent with French noble bloodlines. They appear in Norwegian and Swedish populations. This happened during the 14th century. This timing matches historical records. The records mention mysterious southern blood families arriving. Dr. Lars Andersen is the project's lead geneticist. He noted they see clear evidence of French genetic lineages. These lineages established themselves in Scandinavia. This happened during a very specific time period. That period coincides with the Templar dissolution. The evidence paints a specific picture. This picture involves archaeological and genetic data. Medieval historians are still trying to understand it. After examining the real archaeological evidence, what can we conclude? We looked at evidence from Childerich's tomb to Scandinavian church carvings. The documented facts are these. Merovingian burial goods show sophisticated trade networks. These networks extended far beyond known historical connections. Templar dissolution records show systematic gaps. These gaps are in genealogical archives. 14th century Scandinavian churches contain symbols. These symbols have no precedent in local religious art. Medieval chronicles reference population movements. These movements happened during the Templar dissolution period. Dr. Patrick of the Dynasty summarizes the evidence. He says it points to medieval networks of power and preservation. Official histories completely missed these networks. The Norwegian stone fits perfectly into this pattern. It has French pigments in Scandinavian granite. It has Latin inscriptions using 14th century grammatical constructions. It has symbols that connect to Merovingian royal emblems. The most intriguing aspect isn't what we've proven. It's what we still can't explain. Why were Merovingian genealogies specifically targeted for destruction? This destruction happened after 751 CE. How did Templar-style symbols reach churches across Scandinavia? What happened to the Bloodline records? Those records vanished from Templar archives. Professor Ian Wood of the University of Leeds notes something. He says the systematic nature of these gaps suggests deliberate historical erasure. But the motivation remains an open question. The evidence suggests coordination across vast distances. It also suggests coordination across centuries of time. Someone was preserving something. They considered it invaluable. This isn't just about the Merovingians. Similar preservation patterns appear across medieval Europe. Dr. Malcolm Barber of Reading University is the leading Templar scholar. He has documented how Templar successor organizations worked. These were in Portugal and Scotland. They maintained detailed genealogical records. They did this long after the order's official dissolution. In each case, the focus wasn't on preserving wealth. It wasn't on preserving land grants either. It was on preserving specific family lineages. These lineages traced back to deposed royal dynasties. A question haunts medieval historians. What made these bloodlines worth such extraordinary preservation efforts? Modern archaeology continues, uncovering pieces of this puzzle. The Norwegian stone remains under active study. This study is at the University of Oslo. Recent analysis has confirmed the French origin of its pigments. It also confirmed the medieval dating of its inscriptions. Similar discoveries emerge regularly. A Templar seal was discovered in Iceland. French limestone was found in Norwegian church foundations. Genealogical fragments were found in Portuguese archives. Dr. Rune Halvorsen leads the Norwegian stone research. He notes that each discovery adds another piece to a picture. We are still trying to understand this picture. The evidence points to connections between medieval power structures. We are only beginning to map these connections. What's remarkable is how consistent the symbolism remains. It remains across centuries and continents. The spirals surround winged insects. These are carved on the Norwegian stone. They appear in Merovingian royal seals from the 6th century. They appear in Templar church decorations from the 12th century. They appear in Scandinavian stave churches from the 14th century. Professor Erik Lundberg of Oslo University observed something. He said these symbols traveled through time and space. They did this with remarkable consistency. Someone was maintaining a visual language across generations. The preservation wasn't accidental. It was systematic. It was coordinated. It was intentional. Sometimes what's missing is more revealing than what remains. This is true for historical records. After the Merovingian dynasty was deposed in 751 CE, genealogical records vanished. These records had been meticulously maintained for centuries. They vanished from Frankish archives. After the Templar dissolution in 1307, similar gaps appear. These gaps appear in records across Europe, but they only appear in documents relating to specific noble bloodlines. Dr. Marie Dubois of the Sorbonne studied the La Rochelle ship discovery. She concluded that the pattern of missing records suggests something. It suggests someone was systematically removing evidence. This evidence was of particular family connections. The evidence points to something unprecedented. This is in medieval history. It was a preservation network that operated across centuries. From the 8th century Merovingian deposition through the 14th century Templar dissolution, the same patterns repeat. There was systematic destruction of genealogical records. There was relocation of specific bloodlines to remote territories. There was preservation of symbolic markers in stone and architecture. There was maintenance of oral traditions in areas beyond church control. Professor Michael Brown of the University of St. Andrews notes something. He says we're seeing evidence of coordinated efforts. These efforts spanned multiple countries. They also spanned centuries. This wasn't random preservation. It was organized. It was systematic. It was purposeful. The Merovingian mystery isn't about supernatural bloodlines. It isn't about prophetic awakenings either. It's about power. It's about legitimacy. It's about the extraordinary lengths medieval elites went to. They went to these lengths to preserve what they considered sacred. In an age when royal authority came from divine blessing, bloodlines weren't just family trees. They were political weapons. A legitimate claim to sacred kingship could topple empires. That's what made the Merovingians so dangerous to the church. And that's what made preserving their bloodline so crucial to their guardians. Here's what should keep historians awake at night. If the preservation network succeeded, what happens? If the bloodlines survived, what happens when someone steps forward? This person would have documented proof of Merovingian descent. In our age, institutions are collapsing. People have lost faith in traditional authority. People are desperate for something real. They are desperate for something sacred. They are desperate for something that can't be bought or corrupted. The symbols are carved in stone. The genealogies are preserved in hidden archives. The evidence points to survival. It does not point to extinction. Whether anyone will ever claim that inheritance remains history's most intriguing open question. But it was never just wind. It was the echo of a promise made 13 centuries ago, carried on air too cold to forget. A promise that sacred kingship never dies, it only waits, and the waiting is over. The next time you hear wind whistling through trees, listen carefully, because somewhere in that sound you might hear what the Templars heard, what the Norse sagas recorded, what the prophecy promised, the voice of kings who refuse to stay buried, and they're calling their children home. So now the question is yours to answer. If the prophecy carved into that slab is true, if the Merovingians never died but only slept, what does that mean for us? Is it just a medieval myth kept alive by secret orders and storytellers? Or is it something more? A bloodline that still walks among us, waiting for the moment to rise? What would it mean if a family stepped forward today, claiming descent from kings erased 13 centuries ago? Would you believe them? Would you follow them? Or would you fear them? Because history shows us this much. When people believe a bloodline carries divine right, belief alone can be enough to change the world. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Merovingian prophecy is symbolic, just a story of survival told in myth? Or do you think it points to something real, hidden in plain sight? Drop your theory in the comments. I'll be reading them, and some of you always connect dots, even I miss. And if you want to keep exploring history's buried warnings, the civilizations, dynasties, and secrets that refuse to die, make sure you're subscribed. That way, you'll know when the next hidden chapter is uncovered. Because the past is not silent, it's whispering. And sometimes, it's not whispering to them. It's whispering to you.